It was a peaceful afternoon, at the foot of the mountain. The golden sunlight filtered through the palm leaves, casting soft shadows across the thatched roof of Ly Tieu Ca's humble home. She was behind the house, scattering corn to her chickens, their cheerful clucking blending with the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. In the yard, little Han, her precious daughter, was chasing butterflies, her laughter ringing like tiny bells in the air. That laughter, so pure, so innocent, was everything to Ly Tieu Ca. After all the pain, all the betrayal, Han was the only light left in her life. Then suddenly, the world shifted. The air changed. The butterflies were gone. The laughter stopped. A deep, unnatural silence filled the space where joy had just existed. A chill crawled down Ly Tieu Ca's spine. She turned, her heart beginning to pound. Something was wrong, very wrong. She ran to the front of the house. The yard was empty. No sign of Han. Her throat tightened. Han, she called, the name bursting from her lips like a cry for help. She searched behind trees, under the porch, near the gate. Nothing, no giggle, no footsteps, just silence. Panic gripped her like a vice. Han, where are you? Baby, please. Her voice cracked as she screamed, but no voice answered back. Then, a horrible realization sliced through her mind. Can? Her ex-husband, the man who used to terrify her with his anger and haunt her dreams with the sound of shattered glass and slammed doors. He had once tried to extort money from her over their newborn daughter. He had been arrested, but not for long. No prison wanted to keep him. He had been sent to rehab, only to be released again, like a shadow she could never escape. And now he was desperate again. She fell to her knees, her arms wrapped around herself, sobbing into the dry earth. No, not my baby, not Han. Her body trembled as the pain twisted deeper into her chest. With trembling hands, she scrambled back into the house and reached for the old telephone. Every ring felt like a hammer in her skull. Then, a voice. Hunk. She broke down, her voice choked with sobs. Han is gone. She disappeared. I didn't see anything. I think Can took her. Hung stayed silent for a second, but his silence was strength, not hesitation. Tieu Ca, listen to me. I'm on my way. We'll find her, I promise. He hung up, and moments later, called the police, giving them all the details about Ken. Then, he drove like his life depended on it. Because it did. Han was his family now, too. When Hung arrived, he found Ly Tieu Ca collapsed on the ground, her face white as paper, her hair tangled, and her eyes red from crying. He knelt beside her and took her into his arms. Don't be afraid, he whispered. We'll get her back. I believe Ken took her to his mother's house. She nodded through the tears. With the last of her strength, she got into the car with him, clinging to the hope that her child was still safe. Every turn of the road felt like a cut across her heart. She couldn't breathe until she saw her daughter again. And then, as they pulled up in front of the old wooden house, she heard it. A giggle. A child's voice. She froze. It's Han. They rushed into the yard. There she was, little Han, sitting on the dusty ground, holding a toy she used to love. Across from her sat Can, grinning with a smug expression, as if this were nothing but a game. His mother stood nearby, her arms crossed, glaring at Ly Tieu Ca. The rage inside her ignited. "Can, what the hell are you doing? How dare you take her without a word?" Can stood up, sneering. "She's my daughter. I have every right to see her. Taking a child without the mother's consent is kidnapping," he said. "If you don't return Han now, I'll let the police deal with you." Can laughed bitterly. "The police? I didn't hurt her. I just brought her home. She's my blood." Hung didn't flinch. "You're her father by name, but Ly Tieu Ca is the one who raised her, protected her, loved her. You gave up your rights a long time ago." Tears welled up again in Ly Tieu Ca's eyes, but this time, they weren't just tears of fear, they were tears of strength. She hugged Han tightly, her arms like a fortress. "You will never take her away from me again." She knew this wasn't over. Ken and his family would fight. They might drag her to court. But now, she had someone beside her. She had Hung, she had love, and she had a reason to fight harder than ever before. As Ly Tieu Ca held Han tightly in her arms, she could feel her daughter's small heart beating fast, frightened by the shouting. She ran her fingers gently through Han's hair, whispering, "It's okay, baby, mommy's here. I'm not going to let anyone take you away again." Hung placed a protective hand on Ly Tieu Ca's shoulder. His calm presence was like a wall between her and the chaos. He turned to Can's mother, his voice controlled but cold. "You're lucky we came peacefully. The police are on their way. I suggest you don't make this worse." Ken scoffed but didn't say another word. His hands were trembling, not with fear, but with the cravings he could no longer hide. His mother noticed and stepped back, her eyes beginning to show a flicker of doubt. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed down the narrow village road. 2 police officers stepped out of their vehicle and approached the house. Hung stepped forward to meet them. The child was taken without the mother's consent. "This man has a record of drug abuse and attempted extortion. The child is frightened, and the mother wants her daughter safely returned home." The officers looked at Ken, then at Ly Tieu Ca, who was now sitting on the edge of the steps with Han clinging to her. One of the officers spoke gently to her, asking for details. Between quiet sobs, she told them everything: how Han disappeared, how she feared for her daughter's safety, how Ken had already threatened her before. After a short exchange, the officer turned to Can. "You're coming with us. You have no custody rights and no legal permission to take this child. You'll be questioned at the station." Ken erupted. "You can't take me. I'm her father. But you are not her protector," the officer said coldly. As they cuffed him and led him to the car, his mother shouted, "This isn't over, Tieu Ca. You think this man beside you can replace Han's father?" Ly Tieu stood up slowly, still holding Han in her arms. Her eyes were clear now, no longer filled with fear, but fire. "No one is trying to replace anyone. We're just trying to be safe. Something you and your son clearly don't understand." She turned and walked away, Han holding on to her tightly. Hung followed behind them, opening the car door and helping them inside. She looked at him then, her heart too full for words. In the chaos, in the fear, in the fight, he had stood beside her. Not to rescue her, but to hold her up when her legs could no longer carry the weight of being both mother and warrior. When they reached home, the sun was beginning to set. The golden light wrapped around the house like a warm embrace. Ly Tieu Ca laid Han gently on the bed and tucked her in. She lingered for a moment, watching her daughter's peaceful face, then turned to Han. "What happens now?" she asked. "We protect her," he said. "We talk to a lawyer. We make sure can never take her again. And when you're ready, we build something stronger for her, for us." Ly Tieu Ca didn't respond right away. She walked into the kitchen, poured 2 cups of tea, and handed one to him. They sat together on the old wooden bench, the silence between them soft and comforting. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She felt like she had a partner. A man who didn't just fight for her, but with her. There are stories that entertain us, and then there are stories that stay with us, stories that quietly rearrange something in our hearts. The story of Ly Tieu Ca is one of those rare tales. It is not just about the disappearance of a child or the cruelty of a man driven by addiction. It is about the unwavering strength of a mother, the quiet heroism of love, and the healing power of standing together in the face of fear. Ly Tieu Ca had already been through so much. Abandoned by her husband Can, who chose drugs and recklessness over responsibility. She raised her daughter Han alone. She did not have wealth or power, just the fierce, unconditional love of a mother. And in a world that had offered her so little safety, she created her own. A home, a routine, and moments of quiet joy in the yard where her daughter played. But safety, we learn, is sometimes an illusion. In one heart-stopping moment, Han disappeared. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. As I read the story, I could feel Tieu Ca's breath hitch, her world unravel, her soul shatter. Her daughter, her everything, was gone. And in her place, a void that no words could fill. In Han, we see the quiet strength of a man who doesn't try to take control, but instead offers support. He doesn't ask to replace anyone in Tieu Ca's life. He simply stands by her side, becoming the shield she never asked for but desperately needed. His loyalty is not loud, but it is powerful.